I'm 40 years old and my parents are still paying my bills. This sound familiar to anybody out there? I mean, right off the bat, guys, when I hear this, I mean, it's kind of pathetic, especially if you're 40. I can kind of understand if you're still in your early 20s and still going to school and don't really have time to go to work, but a lot of people do go to school and work and put themselves through school, things like that. But 40 years old, come on, guys. But here's the reality. A lot of parents are still paying their adult children's bills at an alarming pace. So much so that it looks like a lot of these parents are never going to have a shot at retirement because they're spending too much money supporting their children. In fact, the largest beneficiary of this is Gen Z, because Gen Z children right now that are being supported by their parents are receiving about $1,800 a month in monthly assistance from the bank of mom and dad. And according to this new report from savings.com, about 47% of parents said that they have put their own financial future on the back burner in order to keep their children afloat. But 37% of those who are doing this says that they're going to cut off support in the next 2 years. Although I'm sure that's a lot easier said than done, especially if you've been doing it for a long time and your kid doesn't really have any survival skills because they're used to getting all their bills paid. Right now, parents are covering everything from health insurance to cell phone plans. They're paying for 87% of their kids' food and 66% are helping with rent. I mean, those are like the two most crucial things that people need to learn how to fend for themselves for. A place to live and putting food in your stomach, guys. Those are 2 out of the 3 human essentials. And they say on average, working parents are spending more than twice as much on their adult kids as they are on their own retirement. They are spending about $1,600 a month on their adult kids and only $673 a month on retirement. So this is not a good position to be in really at all. And listen, I understand why parents do it. I am not saying that, you're a bad person for doing this. Obviously, you love your kids and you want them to succeed and you want the best for them and you're willing to put yourself, second to them. But in the end, what it's doing is it's handicapping a lot of these kids to the point where they can't live without this support anymore, and that is a dangerous position for them to be in. The crazy part about this new report is that 92.5% of these Gen Z kids that are getting assistance from their parents actually have a job, but they claim that their salaries are not enough to survive today's economy, which that part I actually do believe. I mean, we've seen how much the cost of living has gone up, and if you can't hack it on your own, it's not a crazy idea to get a little bit of money from your parents, but not to take advantage. It's one thing, if they're helping out and giving a few $100 a month here and there, but I mean, paying for half of your bills or all of your food or all of your rent, come on, guys, that's really egregious. And guess what? It's going to have to be a two-way street. If your parents are doing this and sacrificing their retirement for you, well, whenever they can't afford things in retirement, you're going to have to be the one to step up for them because it's actually your fault that they can't afford it. You got to think about it like that too. And this is why about 1/3 of adult children between the ages of 18 and 34 still live at home, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. And again, that's not something to be ashamed of if you're doing it the right way. If you're not taking advantage of your parents and say you're staying at home in order to save money, maybe buy a house or start a business or something, or you're just investing for your own future or retirement, then this can be a positive. Although I'm sure many of us know that a lot of people take advantage of this and ends up being a bad thing for the family. By the way, I'm walking along the bay at this huge retirement community over here called Point East in Aventura. Never walked through here before, but I saw they had this huge waterfront area to walk through on the map, and so far it's pretty cool. But the most worrying part about this trend is because so many adults are kind of putting off their own retirement savings in order to help their adult children now, this could lead to a situation where neither generation is on solid financial footing in the next couple of decades because, say, parents spend all of their retirement savings on helping their kids and their kids never actually end up succeeding on their own or never really make any money or do anything meaningful with their lives, well, now you have two generations that are completely screwed instead of just one. So it's a really, really slippery slope, unfortunately. But according to a study done by Bank of America, they actually predict that by 2035, Gen Z is going to become the richest generation alive due to inheritance and rising salaries. So that'll be interesting to see if that ends up playing out. And if you're one of them who's living at home and taking advantage and still getting payments from your parents, then that may actually end up being true if you're using that money and actually those savings to get ahead in life. But there's also a discrepancy between parents on when kids should start paying their own bills. The kids think it should be later and the parents think it should be earlier. According to parents, they think that kids should start paying their own bills, like your cell phones, your credit cards, car insurance, all that stuff, by the time you're 19 years old. I'm surprised it's not 18, because that's when you're officially an adult. They're giving you a 1-year grace period, I guess. But Gen Z children think that they shouldn't have to start paying their own bills until they are 21 or 22 years old. Let me know what you guys think about that. Where do you stand on this? Because parents are making some pretty big sacrifices right now. In fact, they found out that 68% of parents have made a financial sacrifice recently to help their adult kids with their finances. And 31% of parents said they have made a significant financial sacrifice. They've even spent part of their retirement funds on these sacrifices, or taken out money from their emergency fund or their savings accounts, taking really big hits in order to help their adult children. So you guys better be grateful out there. In fact, the lower income a household is, the more likely they're actually going to help their adult children with the finances. 58% of households making an annual income below $50,000 a year have made financial sacrifices, whereas only 46% of households that make more than $100,000 a year are making those same sacrifices. And interestingly enough, parents who live in the Midwest and these lower cost of living states feel like they actually sacrifice less of their retirement savings for their kids than in other states, which makes sense, right? Because if you have a decent income in one of those states, then you kind of have more to spare than somebody living in Florida or Arizona or Texas or California. But a lot of the financial experts are saying that this is all going too far. Because when parents start sacrificing their own financial future, meaning retirement, in order to help their kids, it could end up spelling disaster for them in the long run. And like I said, if their kids falter and they're not able to help when they get older, well, what happens then? And this is the part I really agree with here. And really, you have to know your kids in order to make this call. But the experts say that paying for your child's bills can enable bad behavior or stunt adult child's development, which is completely true. Because if they're not learning the skills of life, how are they ever going to get by on their own? What if you pass away suddenly now or in a year from now? How are they going to handle things on their own? Sure, they might get an inheritance from you, but what happens when all that's gone? You know what I mean? And even worse, you have a lot of parents who ended up even taking out student loans for their children and may not be able to retire now as expected because of those student loans. And let's face it, guys, the student loans are sucking everybody dry, because if you have a significant student loan with the interest rates and you're not making a diligent effort to pay them off and pay them off early, then you could end up owing more in 15 or 20 years than you ended up starting out with because of the interest rates and how it compounds. But the reality is, people are so broke right now that many are facing a situation where they have to do a car loan modification. We've talked about mortgage loan modifications many times on this channel as basically a temporary fix to be able to continue to afford a home that you probably can't afford. Well, more and more people are looking at doing this now for their cars, because even that is becoming unaffordable. If that doesn't spell out the shape of the economy right now, I don't know what does. The truth is, you probably shouldn't even have a car payment right now in this economy. Like, if you are struggling to pay for a vehicle to the point where you need to do a car loan modification, you just can't afford that car, guys. You should get rid of that car and get something that you can afford to pay for in cash. That's what people really should be doing, but we know people aren't going to do that, so let's continue. So basically what a car loan modification is the same thing as a loan modification for your mortgage. It's where your lender agrees to either lower your interest rate or defer your payments in the short term, or change your payment due date so that it works better for your budget. Also, getting an extended loan term is possible, which is typically what they do with mortgage loan modification. And basically what it does is it stretches out your loan balance over a longer period of time to lower your payments, but also increases the length of time you have to make those payments, and also increases the amount of interest that you will pay in the long run. Now, lenders may do this for you under certain circumstances, because just like with banks, they don't want to repossess a house. Lenders don't want to repossess a car because it costs them money and effort, and they're going to have to send that car to auction and likely get less for that car than they would have gotten from you if you would have continued to make the payments. But it's not as simple as just saying, oh, I want to modify my loan. Can you please do it for me? It's not like that. You have to basically convince your lender and show proof that you are having a financial hardship. Just like whenever you need to do a loan modification for your house, or you want to do a short sale, you got to prove that things are tough for you right now. You can't just call in and complain. Wow, check this out. Haven't seen any yet, but I guess we got to be on the lookout. But you know, there's pros and cons to everything, and there are pros and cons to doing something like this as well, guys. Like, obviously, if you're in a bind and you don't want to, you know, lose your car, or you really love your car, you just can't make that sacrifice to downgrade for whatever reason. You know, the pros of doing this is obviously it can help you catch up on your payments. It might even lower your interest rate if you're lucky. But the downside is that it's probably going to negatively impact your credit report, because lenders are going to have to do a hard pull in order to get the modification process going. And extending your loan is going to increase your overall interest costs over the life of that loan. And doing this process can be lengthy and time consuming. So you better know that you're really going to need to have this assistance for years to come if you're going to do something like this, because otherwise it might not be worth the time, effort, and energy that goes into it. Which is why I said before we even started going down this whole path of talking about this, that the best thing to do is to just have a car that you don't owe anything on right now. That is the smart position to be in 2025, guys. Look at the volatility this economy is seeing right now. Look at the major job losses and things that are happening. You don't know what's going to happen next. So at least if you have a car that's paid for, you know you don't have to worry about the repo man showing up at 3 in the morning to come and take it away from you. And speaking of layoffs, take a look at this. US Cellular, they are going to be laying off about 4,100 workers. And many of you might have never heard of US Cellular before unless you're from the Midwest. In fact, I remember when I was a kid, the very first cell phone company that my parents ever signed up with was US Cellular. They were very big in the Midwest back in the day. I didn't even know that they were still around until recently. But yeah, they are still around, and they're going to be laying off 4,100 people. And part of the reason this is happening is because they are being acquired by T-Mobile now. So people who are going to be losing their job at US Cellular are a lot of employees at stores in Iowa, as well as a lot of the remote workers with the company. And the layoffs are expected to start on June 2nd. So just less than a couple months away. People are getting a heads up. You know, it's not like you are not getting warned about this at all. You are, but 2 months and you're finished. And guess what? If you have a car payment you can barely afford right now and you lose your job from US Cellular, what are you going to do? Are you going to do a loan modification for the car, or are you going to sell the car and drive a beater for a while until you can get back up on your feet? You know, the reason we talk about this stuff, though, is because these decisions, you know, can have a major impact on your entire financial future. You know, whether or not you decide to actually drive a beater for a while or try to continue to make that $700 a month car payment can make the difference of if you're ever able to buy a house one day, or if you're able to afford to have a family, or if you're able to afford to retire, because these financial decisions compound over a long period of time. Now, not everybody's going to be on the chopping block. Some people are going to be lucky enough to get offered a position with T-Mobile, but that could include moving to a new location or, taking a job somewhere across the country. And a lot of companies have been doing this. In case you haven't noticed, like when a store like Walmart closes down a location, they will say, well, these aren't really job losses because everybody who works here is being offered a position at our store that's 50 miles away. But that might not be really feasible for a lot of people to just take a job 50 miles away. Weight Watchers, they're another company right now that's going to be filing for bankruptcy. And you got to understand, when a company files for bankruptcy, it's because they have so much debt that they cannot get out of it under normal circumstances how they're operating right now. It's just not going to be possible. So when they file for bankruptcy, they're basically restructuring their debt. And a lot of times that includes closing down locations. It includes laying off a lot of people and severely impacting the company's day-to-day operations and shrinking their operations in order to try and get some of that debt paid off. In fact, they are $1.6 billion in debt, and they are doing a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The reason for this? They say it's because of the rise of weight loss drugs. Things like Ozempic and Wegovy have basically upended Weight Watchers' entire business model because everybody's always been looking for that magic pill, and now that it's finally here, surprise, surprise, people are turning to it and using it. And this is not a new problem for Weight Watchers either. They have been on the slow decline ever since 2023, and their stock price has been falling ever since then. So this has been a long time coming, unfortunately. But this also is kind of like an interesting cultural statement about Americans, which really isn't that surprising either, which is basically that nobody wants to work, nobody wants to do anything, let's just take the easy way out. And kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Adult kids, leeching off of their parents still. Nobody wants to work, nobody wants to do anything. Let's just take the easy way out. If I can just take Ozempic a couple of times a month and lose 30 pounds, well, that's going to be a lot easier than actually getting off the couch and exercising or changing my diet. I can just continue my poor lifestyle habits and still lose the weight. The problem is shortcuts always come with consequences, guys. When you do stuff like this, you are not actually getting healthier. Sure, losing the weight can make your body healthier because it's no longer carrying around that excess weight, so that does help. But the long-term implications are not being fixed. If you're still eating garbage all the time, it's not going to help you stay healthier on that front. And it's the same thing with adult children living off their parents, right? It might feel good in the meantime because you get to take that summer trip to Italy or whatever and not have to worry about working because your mom and dad are paying your bills while you're gone. But what happens when mom and dad are gone? What happens when you no longer have that support system? Obviously, if your parents are rich and you're going to get a giant inheritance, that probably doesn't matter for you either, so whatever. But for the average person out there that isn't going to get a large inheritance or maybe no inheritance at all, what then? What then? What are you going to do? You haven't learned how to financially make your life secure. That's the biggest problem. So taking shortcuts in life, whether it's for losing weight or with your financials, and one day you're going to end up paying the price for that. That's how things work. And speaking of paying the price, I've been wanting to stay away from talking about the tariffs because it has been such a joke with the tariffs. One day it's on, one day it's off, one day it's high, one day it's low. Nobody knows what's happening with it, right? But I saw an interesting story about the tariffs that I want to cover real quick that is important and affects all of us in terms of the pricing of the everyday things that we buy. Because here's the thing, because of the tariffs, prices on things are starting to go up, right? But even though we're seeing a pause on some of the tariffs, then the prices might not go down as fast as they went up. In fact, they might not even go down at all. So even just the threat of having a tariff on a certain item from a certain country can increase the price on it essentially permanently and making sure that the price on that item never comes back down again. A lot like we saw with the inflation problem during the pandemic. And the reason for this is because of the basic economic principle that prices are sticky. So it's much easier for things to get more expensive, but it's a lot harder to bring the prices down. You have things like cars and appliances, those prices on those items have a much stickier price once they go up due to the complex supply chains. In those cases, these producers need more time to assess the cost increases and decide how much to raise prices for wholesalers or consumers. And so as a result, and once implemented, stay higher for longer. And even companies that are trying to bring manufacturing back to the US, for example, guess what? That is a costly endeavor that takes time, energy, and resources of a company. And now that they have to spend more money on that, the price increases that they originally earmarked for the tariffs are now going to be there in order to pour into R&D and potentially bring manufacturing back to the US. So either way, you're stuck with that high price, even if a manufacturer is planning on doing more of their manufacturing here in the States. And let's say the tariffs go away completely, right? Trump changes his mind and there's gonna be no more tariffs at all, okay? Then it still takes time for the supply chain to readjust. And the costs associated with the supply chain adjustments are also very sticky. The only things that are likely to go up and down pretty rapidly with a tariff on or off are things like fuel or food, which is good at least because those are two things that people really need to buy quite often and spend a lot of their budget on. But take a restaurant, for example. This is a great example of this. Even though it's food, okay, the restaurant owner raises the price of their guacamole on the menu because of the tariffs on avocados, okay? And then the restaurant owner needs to print all brand new menus to reflect the higher input costs of the avocados. And if they think avocado prices are going to continue rising, they're going to set the prices now. And even if the tariffs get removed or the prices of avocados come down, they're not going to magically start, printing out a bunch of new menus and lowering the cost of the guacamole, especially if it's a hot item. And even if the cost does come down and the restaurant owner realizes, hey, I'm making a greater profit margin on this guacamole than I used to, the sales aren't being affected by it, why am I going to lower the price? Just like what we saw during the pandemic, the greedflation, right? You had a lot of companies raising the price of goods and services due to inflation, even though they might not have needed to do that in order to have their business survive. They did it anyways, and guess what? Have the prices on those things come back down? No. And so that's likely where we're headed with the tariff situation too, unfortunately. Now that we've already been doing this dance back and forth with all these different countries on will we have the tariffs, won't we have the tariffs, how much are they going to be, just the threat that they might be there is all it takes to increase the prices and probably make it so that they never come back down. Just want to throw that out there because at least with all the volatility going on with the tariff situation, this is something that we can probably count on, which is going to be higher prices for everything, most likely permanently. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.